Out of all the regions of Europe, few have had such a tumultuous, unpredictable, and dynamically evolving history as Southeast Europe, or the Balkans, and the region in the farthest southeastern corner of the Balkans, traditionally known as Thrace, has had one of the most fascinating and unique situations in the area. Although the original homeland of the Proto-Indo-Europeans is still debated to this day, with the majority generally leaning towards an origin in the Eurasian steppes, Anatolia and the Balkans became home to a multitude of Indo-European peoples that were very distinct from any of the modern surviving peoples we see there today, including the Hittites, Lydians, Lycians, and in the Balkans there were Dacians, Thracians, and Illyrians, and the exact nature of the genealogical relation between these ancient groups with each other and modern groups are also heavily debatable. Celtic tribes would also settle in the Balkans and Anatolia in the pre-Hellenic and pre-Roman eras, most famous of which are likely the Galatians. Because the Thracian language and all of its close linguistic relatives have since gone extinct over 1,000 years ago, the native name of the Thracians in their own tongue is not known for sure. Thrace is an exonym derived from the Greek Thracis and Latin Thraci, with both of these sources describing the Thracians as fierce and brutal warriors. Similar to other early Indo-Europeans, Thracians, Illyrians, and Dacians were only some of the non-Hellenic peoples of southeastern Europe who accompanied the Macedonians during Alexander the Great's conquest of the Persian Empire, and the many tribes of Thrace were united into a loosely organized tribal confederation, first under King Terence I in the 5th century BC. Struggling to maintain its independence under the expansionist auspices of neighboring powers, briefly being absorbed into the Persian and Hellenic realms, which led to a certain degree of Persian and especially Hellenic influence, as Greek colonies sprouted up all along the southern and eastern coasts of Thrace on the Aegean and Black Seas. After the conquest of Thrace by the Romans in the 1st century AD, this region became increasingly entrenched into the Greco-Roman world, with the southern half becoming Hellenized and the northern half Latinized, although the first major shift would occur during the migration of a multitude of Slavic tribes and later the Turkic Bulgarians, or Bulgars, under the Khan Aspera, who led the Bulgars into the Balkans in the 7th century, conquering large swaths of Byzantine territory, later to be retaken by the Byzantines, but the demographics were fundamentally altered. This led to the gradual extinction of the Thracian and Turkic Bulgar languages in favor of various southern Slavic dialects. So when the Second Bulgarian Empire broke off from the Byzantines once more in the 12th century, they were largely Christian and Slavic, up until the conquest of the region by the Ottomans a few centuries later. The Ottoman Empire and Turkey were rather unique in the Middle East and all of Western Eurasia, in that it has connections to pretty much all of Eurasia, from Central Asia and by extension Northeast Asia, the ancient homeland of the Turks, to the Caucasus, Levant, Balkans, and even North Africa. For this reason and many others, Turks from very different backgrounds, including those of different tribal and geographic backgrounds, have fused into one during the Ottoman period. And in addition to the diverse array of Turkic peoples who arrived in Anatolia, including the Seljuks and Oghuz, they even began accepting those from other ethnic groups into their ranks, as long as they accepted the dominant Turkic culture, like speaking their language and converting to their religion, which of course in this case was Islam. So it is known that significant numbers of native Anatolians, including Greeks, Armenians, and others, would have converted to Islam and assimilated into the Turkic population over time. Later on, when other empires were expanding and Ottoman territory was crumbling, Anatolia also absorbed millions of Turkic and other Muslim peoples such as the Circassians, Chechens, Dagestanis, Kumyks, Balkars, other Muslims from the Caucasus, Crimean Tatars, and other Turks from former Ottoman territories in the Balkans, the Levant, and North Africa. During the latter years of Ottoman rule in the Balkans, other Islamic minorities, including Albanians, Muslim Meglenites, Pomaks, Bosniaks, and others, would also be gradually assimilated into the Turkic majority. All these factors have led to a rather heterogeneous and diverse genetic and cultural composition of the Turks of Anatolia and its surroundings. This extreme diversity greatly contributed to the internal destability of the Ottoman Empire during its latter years and decline, with each piece being systematically chipped away by other growing powers, such as Egypt, Iran, Russia, France, Italy, the various Balkan states, and finally the Arab Revolt stripped away most of Turkey's holdings in the Levant and Mesopotamia, leaving the republic as it is today. After World War I, various other regions of Turkey were granted to other powers such as Armenia, Greece, Italy, and France. However, they were later expelled from Anatolia and eastern Thrace during the Turkish War of Independence. All of these factors and this history has likely played a role in the aggressive assimilation policies and violent repression of minorities the Ottoman and later Turkish governments would pursue, and why they have been involved in so many plans for suppressing and eliminating non-Islamic, non-Turkic minorities. Estimates vary considerably, but needless to say, the number of victims of the genocides, pogroms, and other acts of violence and cruelty committed by the Ottoman and Turkish governments against the Greeks, Armenians, Assyrians, Bulgarians, Serbs, and later Kurds easily number in the millions. All countries and nations have elements that have committed some level of crime against humanity at some point, especially considering the period, where it's important to note Turks and other Muslims were not treated very well during that period as well. After all, there's a reason why so many millions of Turks and other Muslims migrated to Turkey during this period, with genocides or expulsions of the Circassians, where nearly the entire nation was uprooted and scattered throughout the Balkans, Anatolia, Iran, the Levant, and even as far as Egypt and North Africa. Crimean Tartars, with only a fraction of the once significant nation, still remains, and the majority of the Turks who once lived in the Balkans were also expelled. This context is needed to understand what happens next. In the chaotic climate in 1913, on the eve of World War I, the ever-shrinking Ottoman Empire was taking dire steps to hold on to the last of its territory. As the major pogroms and acts of violence committed against Christian minorities began to rise, Greeks, Armenians, and other Christian refugees began to pour into Constantinople and eastern Thrace by the thousands, briefly making the city majority Christian for the first time in centuries. And for the last time, during the Turkish War of Independence, Turkish forces under Mustafa Kemal Pasha, later known as Ataturk, recaptured the lost territories from Armenia, Greece, and expelled the last of the foreign influences. Extreme nationalist groups, sometimes including civilian mobs, would harass, attack, and drive out the vast majority of Christians from the territory that became Turkey, leaving them as an extremely small minority today, although some have hung on and remain in their homeland, although the vast majority of these groups have migrated to Istanbul and other large cities today. Another significant minority in Thrace not indigenous to the European continent are the Romani, the traditionally nomadic Indo-Aryan peoples who settled in Anatolia and the Balkans, likely around the 12th century AD, at a time when the Byzantine Empire and other powers in southeastern Europe were experiencing severe upheaval and demographic, political, and cultural paradigm shifts. Ethnicity in Turkey is an extremely contentious and sensitive subject, not least of which because of the multitude of ethnic purges and ongoing ethnic conflicts in certain regions of the country. And I've even seen some say that ethnicity is an artificial construct created by the West in order to divide Turkey. This is quite sad, not for the commenter, but the multitude of religious and ethnic minorities that have suffered due to this sort of attitude. What makes this particularly frustrating and painful for these minorities is that the Turkish state never had any significant repercussions for these actions, and many continue to deny these atrocities. Nevertheless, like many different countries, Turkey has undergone a dramatic demographic shift since the beginning of the 20th century, as due to these aggressive assimilation policies and massive birth rates, the population has undergone a massive change from a religiously and ethnically diverse country to a more homogenized nation-state that still has certain ethnic and cultural quirks. The northern half of Thrace, also known as Eastern Rumelia, had become a part of the state of Bulgaria in 1886, while Western Thrace was initially claimed by Bulgaria, but eventually won by Greece in 1919 after the end of the Great War. The population of Western Thrace was a unique hodgepodge of various ethnicities and religions, with no single people group making up the majority. Before 1919, Greeks were actually a minority in the region, as there were also large numbers of Muslim Turks, Pomaks, and Romani, as well as a large Christian Bulgarian population. However, following the modern border demarcation between Greece and Bulgaria, virtually the entire Christian Bulgarian population was expelled from Western Thrace, and likewise the Christian Greeks were expelled from Northern Thrace in Bulgaria. The Muslims of Western Thrace were allowed to remain under the condition that the Greeks of Eastern Thrace would also remain, and although the vast majority of Christians were essentially driven out of Eastern Thrace in the following decades, Greece actually upheld their end of the deal, and today Muslims of various origins make up around a third of Western Thrace's population. The island of Imbros, near Gallipoli and Samothrace, was one of the few majority Greek islands captured by Turkey during the War of Independence, and various pogroms and other acts of violence and discrimination would lead the majority to emigrate in the 20th century, later to be replaced by Muslim settlers from other parts of Turkey. The Ottoman Empire's ethno-religious enumeration methods were largely inconsistent and politically motivated, as at various times all Islamic groups, regardless of origin, were grouped as one, and Christian, Jewish, and other non-Islamic groups were largely undercounted. This makes it incredibly difficult to tell the exact demographic structure of the Thracian population in the early 20th century. Because many of these sources gathering data on ethnic and religious affiliation in these regions belonged to various governments or had some other conflict of interest, estimates for the exact composition varies drastically due to bias and different enumeration methods. The only area of Thrace where the population has been well documented and relatively undisputed is Constantinople, later to become Istanbul. The population of Eastern Thrace has changed significantly since this period as well, having one of the most drastic and unexpected demographic transformations in Europe and the entire world. Outside of Istanbul, the population of some areas such as Edirne and Kirklareli have grown but remained relatively stagnant in the past few decades, mainly due to emigration to neighboring Istanbul and its surroundings, while Istanbul's population has exploded as it became a major world city and was flooded by migrants from all over Turkey and recently the rest of the world. Mainly driven by the conflict with nationalist groups like the PKK in southeastern Turkey, Istanbul and Eastern Thrace has been inundated with millions of Kurdish migrants who now make up the largest minority in Istanbul and Eastern Thrace at 10 to 20% of the city's population. Arabs, including refugees, illegal immigrants, migrant workers, and Turkish Arabs native to southeast Anatolia, now make up around 5 to 10% of Turkey's population, which would make it the largest in the diaspora outside of the Arab world. The native and migrant Arabs are predominantly Sunni and Alawite, with smaller Shia and Christian minorities. This has revived interest in the Arabic language all across the country, which had been in decline for decades, with only around half of Turkey's native Arab population speaking it as their mother tongue. There are now around 1 to 2 million Arabs in Istanbul and Eastern Thrace, giving it the highest proportion and concentration of Arabs in the entire European continent. In the past century, Istanbul has essentially transformed into a mini-Turkey of sorts, becoming home to ethnic and religious groups from all over the country, including Kurds, Zazas, Assyrians, Armenians, Lays, Circassians, Georgians, Romanis, Jews, and others. And most of these recent migrants had settled in informal, low-cost housing called Gecekondu. Istanbul is home to a third of Turkey's Alevi population, over half of Turkey's Christians, and 80% of the Jewish population, making up around 21 and 0.1% of the city's population. Northern and Western Thrace also have very interesting demographics, originally having extremely heterogeneous and diverse populations that became increasingly homogenized over the 20th century as ethnic minorities fled to their home nations or were assimilated into the dominant culture of these new nation-states. At the start of the 20th century, the region of Thrace had around 2 million inhabitants, with no single group making up the majority, and all areas having a diverse makeup of Turks, Greeks, Slavs, Romanis, Armenians, and countless others. Although these areas have homogenized somewhat since then, they remain some of the most heterogeneous regions of Europe, having grown to around 15 million people, with many new ethnic and religious communities that didn't even exist in the area 100 years ago. Another interesting development in the region of modern Eastern Thrace and Istanbul is that this area is one of the least religious parts of not only Turkey, but the entire Islamic world. Although nominally Islamic, levels of secularization are comparable to other parts of Europe, with over 40% of the population identifying as irreligious, which is 2 to 3 times higher than Turkey on average. And this is no surprise considering religiosity almost always decreases in major world cities due to a multitude of factors, and this has led to political and cultural polarization like almost every other modern country. Estimating just how many of the individuals in the archaic region of Thrace today are indigenous to the region and descended from the original Thracians is definitely difficult, if not impossible, due to the multitude of migration and admixture events in the area throughout the past several millennia. However, we can tell that a majority of the population in eastern Thrace are descended from more recent migrants from other parts of Anatolia, the Balkans, and the Middle East, making it stand out from other parts of Europe in the modern day as an extremely distinct and unique region and identity that will continue to change and evolve throughout the 21st century. So although the Thracians of old are definitely gone, remnants of their culture and descendants continue to live on in the modern Greek, Slavic, and Turkic peoples of the region, all of whom have extremely divergent histories and complex ethno-cultural compositions and influences. Let me know your thoughts on the ancient Thracians and the modern people who inhabit the region of Thrace today, and how you think the situation will evolve in the upcoming decades. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been Mason. I'll see you next time.